I'd like to welcome everyone back to our Wednesday share. The topic, as it was before the break, is a sikha, a talk of the Rebbe on the weekly Parsha. We expand on it, discuss some ideas in the Parsha, and based on the talks of the Rebbe and classic authorities, what they say about it. So this week we have a double portion. Sometimes in a year that's not a leap year, we double up some portions. So like this, we finish the whole Torah every single year by the holiday of Simchat Torah. So this week we double up a portion. There's the portion of Achrei Mot and Kedoshim. And today we're going to discuss a verse, a mitzvah that appears in the second parsha, the second portion of this week, which is Kedoshim. Now, just to begin with, there's a saying that's attributed to the Hasidim in the first generations of Hasidism, which is in the 18th century, that they said that this slice of bread that I have is yours just like mine, right? And it was noted that they used to say yours before mine, which the idea here is that they were holding by such a level of selflessness that they're able to understand that if they have something and someone else is in need and they don't need it, so then they're ready to give it to him without second thought, because it's as if you have a portion in this bread. In other words, they didn't see any boundaries between them and their fellow. Now, obviously, this idea is a very hard idea to understand, as we'll see soon. So what we have to understand is, first of all, what's the depth here? How did they achieve such a level? What is behind this saying of theirs? And second of all, is it something achievable? Is it something that we're even able to get to aspire to? Is it something that we're supposed to aspire to, able to get to? So we'll discuss this idea in today's talk. Now, this week's Parsha, we have the verse. It's in Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 19. I don't remember the exact verse. It says, famously says, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You shall love your fellow as yourself. Right? That's what the verse says. You should love your fellow as yourself. It's quoted a lot. It's quoted a lot, that people use it a lot in various contexts. But what we want to think now is this mitzvah, as exciting as it is, right away makes us think a few simple questions here. First of all, is it possible to love someone else like yourself? Is that even something possible? Now, the difference between the way someone loves themselves and the way they love other people is that self-love, what you call self-appreciation, how we appreciate, we're comfortable with ourselves, and we love ourselves, we don't need any reason for it. We don't have to excuse it. We don't say the reason why I love myself is because of this quality or because of that quality. We like it because we like ourselves, because we're comfortable with this is us. When it comes to the way we love someone else, so then there's a reason why we love them. There's a certain quality we see by them. There's something we like about them, something we appreciate about them. And based on that idea that we appreciate or that we value, so based on that, we love them. Now, the difference between these two loves, whether it's because this is who I am and therefore I'm just comfortable with myself, and therefore I love myself, or a love that is based on a certain reason is not only a difference. Is there a reason, or is it just who I am? The love is much stronger when it's not based on a reason. Meaning, if there's a certain quality that, and because of that quality, that's what my love is based on. So then it's limited to that quality. So if that's an important quality, so then I'll love them more. If it's not such an important quality, or it's not important in general, it's not important to me, so then it won't awaken such a deep love on me. On the other hand, the love that a person has to themselves, that's just who I am. It's not limited. So the strength of this love is an unlimited love. So according to this, there's a fundamental difference between the love that someone has for themselves and the love that someone could develop for someone else. That the love for someone else is always going to be limited because it's always based on a certain reason or quality that is causing it. So if that's the case, how in the world could the Torah say, "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha"? You should love someone else, your fellow like yourself, if that's impossible, seemingly. It's two different types of loves. So it almost seems like we're asking something that God is asking from us, something that's totally impossible. That someone should love their fellow as themselves, exactly as themselves. So that's the first question that this mitzvah arises. But the second question is a more general question. How could we be commanded to develop a feeling for something, a emotion? Either I like it or I don't like it. Either I have that love or I don't have it. There are certain things when it comes to do's or don't do's, then that's something that could be demanded from us. That's something that could be asked from us to do, even if you don't feel like it, even if you're not in the mood. You should still do it. When it comes to an emotion, when it comes to something, a feeling of ours, seemingly it's almost impossible, or at least very difficult, to expect someone to have a certain emotion. It's like a kid who comes home from school one day and he got into a fight and with another child in class, and he hit the child. They got into a fight, a physical fight. So what does the parent say? Listen, I know you're angry, I know you're not happy, but hitting, you don't hit. You don't lift your hand on another child. Yeah, you're angry, we'll work it out. We would try to figure it out, we'll work on it. But the first thing is, don't do something that's wrong. And the same way works the other way when it's doing something right. Sometimes I could not be in the mood of doing what's right, but since I know this is right, so even if I'm not in the best spirit, I'm not in the best mood, I could still do it because action is something that I could do even if I don't feel that way. So it makes sense to have commandments on actions, but seemingly it doesn't make sense to have a commandment on an emotion. Either I do like or I don't like. All right, so these are the two questions that this mitzvah right away brings up when we just start thinking about it. First of all, how can you love someone else like yourself? We are two different people. The love that I love myself is a whole different type of love. It's essential love, because this is me. And the love to someone else is always going to be limited by a reason. And based on that, obviously, the love to myself is not limited, and the love to someone else is limited. That's the first question. The second question is, in general, how could Hashem demand from us and expect from us an emotion? Isn't that something that's beyond? In other words, if you have the emotion, very nice, but to expect it from us and to hold us accountable for it, so that seemingly is something these are two difficulties that this mitzvah brings up. Are these two questions clear? All right, so we'll move on. Now, today we're going to discuss three separate approaches to the mitzvah of Ahavas Yisrael, of loving your fellow Jew. Each approach being a little bit different, or some of them radically different. And I collected, like I did last time, I have a source sheet that I'm going to share in the chat, and I'm also going to share it on the screen. So like this. So I'm going to do that now. Let's see, chat. All right. So all right. So we're going to start with the first approach, the approach of the Ramban. So we're first going to see how he phrases the question. So here. All right. So he brings the verse. The first, number one on the source sheet is the Ramban. He says you must love your fellow as yourself. So the first thing he says, this is an expression by way of overstatement. For a human heart is not able to accept a command to love one's neighbor as oneself. All right, that's the first thing. He sees this verse, to love your fellow as yourself. He says it doesn't mean literally. It can't mean literally because it's not possible. So sometimes the Torah uses different expressions which are overstatement, meaning just like when people speak, a lot of times when we want to make a point and we want to get a point across, we would exaggerate. We would use an overstatement to express maybe how important it is or for whatever reason. So also Torah, which there's a rule that in Hebrew, Dibra Torah Kalashon Bnei Adam, that Torah uses the language of man. That's the language Torah uses, the terminology that Torah uses. So Torah also sometimes would express things in a way of an overstatement, and it's not meant to be taken literally. So the Ramban, which is a scholar that is part of the Rishonim, meaning he lived probably around, I don't know, 800, 900 years ago, 700 years ago. So he made this observation that this is a very hard mitzvah to understand, and he said that it's in a way of overstatement. So now, what does the Torah mean? Okay, it's an overstatement, but what does the statement mean? Even when you're saying an overstatement, there is an idea that you're trying to say. So what is this? What is the idea of the hafta l'reacha kamocha? You should love your fellow as yourself. So he says the idea is that it's telling us how to act to other people. Meaning, we don't mean over here to say how you should feel towards other people, but rather how you should act. Meaning, just like a person wants by himself, for himself, all good. So same too for someone else, he also should act in a nice way. And he should try to provide as much as the best to his ability that someone else should also have all good. Now, what's good for one person might not be good for someone else. So that's why what he's saying is, it's not the same good. Whatever I want, I should give to someone else, because maybe what he wants and what he needs is different. The idea is that just like I want all good for myself, I should provide and I should act towards someone else also with all good. So it's not a commandment involving emotion here. It could be you don't feel that way, but nevertheless, you should act towards someone else in the way that you would want someone to act towards you. And this is something we could understand. Acting, like we said earlier, acting is not a problem for someone to act, even if he doesn't feel exactly the same way as even though if he doesn't feel the exact way as his actions are, but he could act that way even despite his emotions. So let's take a look again on how the Ramban phrases his answer. let's see. So rather, the second line in source 1, the commandment of the Torah means that one is to love one's fellow being in all matters. So it's not about emotion, it's about the matters, about the actions, as one loves all good for oneself. The meaning thereof is to equate the love of both himself and his neighbor in his mind. For sometimes a person will love his neighbor in certain matters, such as doing good to him in material wealth, but not with wisdom and similar matters. But if he loves him completely, he will want his beloved friend to gain riches, properties, honors, knowledge, and wisdom. However, because of human nature, he will still not want him to be his equal, for there will always be a desire in his heart that he should have more of these good things than his neighbor. Therefore, Scripture commands, so what exactly is the commandment? That this degrading jealousy should not exist in his heart, but instead a person should love to do abundance of good for his fellow being as he does for himself, and he should place no limitations upon his love for him. So obviously this is an idea, this is about showing love to someone else, but it's not so much about feeling the love that you should love someone just as yourself, but rather you should act to someone else in a loving way, just like you would want someone to act to you, and just like you want all good for yourself. So that's the first approach. And obviously this approach takes care of both problems that we started off with. The first problem being, how could you love someone else like yourself? And the answer being, according to this approach, there is no such mitzvah. That's not what Torah meant. Torah meant you should act towards someone else as you love towards yourself. And the second question, which was how, in general, how could we have a commandment about an emotion of the heart? So here, there is no commandment about the emotion of the heart. It's a commandment about action. All right? So that's the first approach. Now, from here, we're going to move on to the second approach, being that it is a well-known saying that Rabbi Kiva said. We're going to go back to our short source sheet here, share. Number 2. Rabbi Kiva says, number 2, you must love your fellow as yourself. Rabbi Kiva said, this is a major principle of the Torah. What is Rabbi Kiva trying to say by categorizing this as a major principle? So, in a talk, the Rebbe offers a very interesting approach to what Rabbi Kiva is trying to say. It says the following. In general, who needs a commandment? Step back. In the commandments of the Torah are split into 2 categories. Commandments which are between man and his fellow, and commandments which are between man and his creator and Hashem. In the commandments between man and his fellow, there are many mitzvahs, like not mitzvahs that are actually in this week's Parsha. Not to take revenge, not to gossip, then there's mitzvahs in other parshas, not to steal, not to hurt someone, to respect someone else's property, etc. Many mitzvahs. So who needs all of these particular mitzvahs if we already have the mitzvah of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, to love your fellow as yourself? Once you have this mitzvah, love your fellow as yourself, automatically, yes, you won't steal from him. You probably won't speak bad about him. You won't harm him. So why do we have a number of mitzvahs, one after another, that tell us how to act towards other people, if we already have this general mitzvah, this mitzvah which seemingly covers all bases? Love your fellow as yourself. Treat him the way you want to be treated yourself. Period. Why do we need all these particular mitzvahs? So to answer this question, Rabbi Kiva says that v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, the commandment of loving your fellow, is a klal, is a principle, is a rule. Every rule is a generalization of particular ideas. So when you come to a commandment, which you call this commandment is a principle, this commandment is a rule. So what you're saying is that this commandment has in it, or obligates, or from it comes many particular mitzvot, many particular commandments. So that's exactly what the mitzvah of Avos Yisrael, of loving your fellow as yourself, is. That's a general mitzvah. Now, out of this mitzvah comes the particular mitzvahs: don't hurt someone, don't kill, don't steal, don't gossip, don't take revenge. Because so those are only the particular aspects that are a result, or that are offshoots of this principle. So you can't say just say v'hafta, just say love your fellow as yourself, and don't say the particular mitzvah, because this is something that's very normal in the Torah, that the Torah says a rule and then it says the particular mitzvot. For example, one place in the Torah says that you should return a lost object, and then the Torah goes on to particulars and lists different types of lost objects. If it's clothing, if it's his animal, if it's dishes that if it's a vessel that he lost. So you have this idea of Torah saying a rule and then saying particulars. So here also, that's exactly what the Torah is doing. It's telling us a rule. Telling us a rule, love your fellow as yourself. And then it tells us how does that manifest practically? What should we do? So then throughout the Torah, it tells us many different mitzvot, many different commandments, exactly what we should do and how we should express that that love. So, and that's what Rabbi Kiva is trying to say, that this is a major principle of Torah. This is a principle that all over Torah, you'll look and you'll see different mitzvot, different commandments, and those different commandments are all offshoots, and they all come and stem and are rooted into this mitzvah, from this mitzvah. Now, once we have this, once we know this, that the commandment of loving your fellow as yourself is a general commandment, it's a general mitzvah. So then we could understand. Now here it's a little tricky. On the one hand, we're saying that you're supposed to try. The idea is to try to love someone else and to develop that emotion. However, what we're held accountable for, what we are held, what Hashem, what we are obligated to do is the particulars, not the rule. Meaning there's a rule that is the driving force, that is the spirit behind the particular mitzvot. And we should try to develop that spirit, try to have that love. But even if we can't, that is not going to affect the particular commandments, because what we're obligated and we're held accountable for is the particular commandments. To say it a little bit different, if the commandment of Avat Yisrael, loving another Jew, was a standalone commandment, was not a rule, so then that would mean this is something I have to achieve, and this is something that I'm held accountable to achieve. And if I don't achieve it, then I'm not fulfilling this particular commandment. But by saying that it's a general rule, we are saying that the idea here is not by saying that's a general rule, so it's not a standalone commandment. So by this, we're indicating that what we're held accountable for and what are obligated to do is the actions that stem from this commandment, are the particular ideas that come from this commandment. So and therefore, we can answer both of the questions that we started off with. The question was, how could someone love each other as someone else, as their fellow as themselves? That's not possible. And the second question was, how could God command us over an emotion? But according to this, true, there is a commandment for an emotion, but we're not really held accountable for that. We're held accountable for the particulars, from the things that the particular commandments that stem from this emotion, which we have to do even if we don't have the emotion. And that is something that we could be commanded on, and something that we could be held accountable for. So that is the second approach. So this approach, if we just compare the two approaches, the first approach and the second approach, it comes out very different. The first approach is saying, loving your fellow as yourself, having a real love for someone else, not possible. That is not what the Torah commanded us. According to that approach, I don't even know if it's something to desire to, but I don't know if it's something that we're supposed to be working on to get to. The idea what we're supposed to be working on is how to treat people. That was Ramban's approach, and many that actually have that approach. The second approach is a little different, or maybe even very different. The second approach is saying that there is a commandment to love your fellow as yourself. However, that's not what we're held accountable for. What we're obligated to do is the particulars. So even though there is such a commandment, but what we have to focus on and what we really have to work on are the particulars, which is something which we could try to achieve. So those are the first two approaches. Is it clear? Before we move on to the third.
Rabbi, I got a question. Go down to basic number one. Does Judaism define love as an emotion?
Meaning what?
Well, I find it difficult because I love my daughter. I don't consider it emotional. I can love my brother. I don't consider it emotional. It's just something that seems to go beyond emotion. That's from another place than emotion.
Right. So that's interesting. I think we use the term love sometimes. I don't want to say it exactly as a lack of better words, but I think I was thinking before the class, like what's exactly, for example, you can ask a question even further, like what does it mean to love yourself? Right, I was saying before in the beginning, no one loves someone else the way they love themselves. So do you have an emotion towards yourself? So what I think it's more, it means the general appreciation and the connection, the positive connection, which is close to love. In other words, that feeling towards your daughter, it might not be an overwhelming or a very emotional love, but it's a real appreciation. It's a strong. I'm not sure I have the right. I'm expressing myself right.
No, you're right. I mean,
right.
You're right. It is difficult to be able to.
Right.
It's almost an abstract thing.
Yeah. Robert. Yeah. Robert.
No, I understand what Abraham is saying. It's how can you qualitize the love for your daughter, as I have a daughter and he does, and others who are an extension of you because they're part of you. So you can't put a value on it because it's intangible. I mean, it's there because she's my flesh and blood. And then, loving yourself, if it's a healthy love of oneself and not narcissistic, then you come to grips of who you are and your appreciation of yourself with your strengths and weaknesses. And you want to see your strengths in other people as well, especially those who you choose to have friends with. And the same thing with, again, my daughter and Abraham's daughter and everybody else's daughter or son, that you want them to have a good life and you want them to have a value of life that makes them satisfied with themselves as well, and as they relate to other people. For me, it's part of the continuum that we all should practice, and we should practice as Jews because of the value of Judaism, as you just articulated in the two statements.
Correct. Very good. So this, really what you're saying, that's actually explaining the question, the problem here, in a certain sense. That
it's a challenge. I like calling it a challenge, right?
Right, the challenge. And that's actually why the first approach is that since it's not comparable, that's why there is no commandment, and that's not what we're expected to do, to love someone else or to as they want as they have towards themselves or towards their children or their spouse, etc. And rather, it's just in a way of action. In other words, it's similar to, and the second approach is more that even though it's good to develop that emotional love and that to other people, but you're not really accountable for what you're accountable for is the general charity and treating other people properly, not hurting them in any way, and treating them properly. Correct. Any other thoughts? Or we continue. All right. It's clear? Everything's clear? All right.
Yeah.
So now we're going to move on to the third approach, which in a certain sense, yeah.
I have a question or a comment regarding this, and maybe it's another bit of a way to explain it.
Yeah, what?
My mom told me that, many other religions, they tell you to be good to people this way and that way, and that it's a command to do good to others. But in our religion, the emphasis is on doing positive action for people when holding on to other people.
I'm sorry, but you're a little choppy. It's hard for me to hear.
I say that they don't love them. And these actions evidence enough consideration and concern for other people so that you will get in the habit of doing these good for others and behaving in a proper and decent way with them and not harming them, so that it would be a reflection of love if you had it, and the whole contributes to Ahavas Israel. It's a better situation for the entire community.
All right, so you're saying that if we start by action, then we'll develop the healthy and the loving community to one to another. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that was the idea, that our religion encourages actions which cause that.
That's correct, 100%. Very good point. And we'll actually see soon, we'll see a little bit of another twist to that. In other words, I'll bring that idea a little further and a little deeper. We'll see by the end of the class that sometimes action actually helps us, implants in us the emotion. Now, when we act a certain way, that would cause us to also feel that way, and it changes us in a certain way, as we'll see soon. All right, now the third approach. The third approach is probably the most, in a certain way, the most radical. On the other hand, it is also the most literal. Third approach says, what does it say in the Torah? V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You should love your fellow as yourself. Now, loving your fellow, let's take those words literally. In the beginning of the class, we brought down from the Ramban that said it's exaggeration. It's not meant to be taken literally, those words, to love your fellow as yourself. This approach is going to say, no, we are here to take it literally. Is there a way that I could understand the commandment literally, someone else as yourself, and together with that, not have the two questions that we started off with, being one, the self-love and the self-appreciation someone has to themselves, with the ones close to them, is much more than they're ever going to have towards someone else. And how could we even like expect that from someone? And second of all, in general, how could we expect from someone to develop an emotion or a feeling when it's something that's not always that's not always automatic. Something that, so if I'm not in that mode, if I'm not in that mood, I'm not able to feel it. So is there a way that we could take the verse literally, and together with that, answer those two challenges? All right, David?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I don't have the verse in front of me, but the verse says, and you should love. And it always says that if you're saying and, it's referring to what came before it. Otherwise, it wouldn't have to say and. It would just say, love your fellow as yourself. Right. So what is the thing that's the and may be referring to that might give us a glimpse of the answer?
Right, so interesting. The verse before it, or the beginning of this verse, is speaking about particular actions that someone shouldn't do to someone else. You shouldn't. The ones that are discussed here is revenge, is taking revenge, and keeping, and the ones discussed here is taking revenge, and lashon hara, gossiping. And I think also holding hatred towards someone else in your heart. So that's what's coming. That's what it is a continuation to those verses. And so in other words, this is like sort of the point, or the spirit behind the previous commandments, which were stated earlier, and according to any of the explanations that we're giving here. All right. So to the third explanation, which again is going to take the verse very literal, and together with that, not have the two challenges that we started off with. And this, so how is that possible? So for this is where Hasidus comes in. The Hasidic thought, Hasidic philosophy, which there's a class in the morning in the Tanya, which is one of the main books on Hasidus, where the founder of Chabad Hasidism, Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, wrote a book. It's actually the first book which is a systematic book on Hasidic philosophy. So before that, things were printed, ideas were printed, but not in a systematic way. So it's the first systematic book. There, he has a chapter devoted to understanding Avat Yisrael, loving your fellow as yourself, according to Chassidus, according to sort of a mystical take on it. Now, to appreciate the idea that he's saying, just to give a brief introduction to one of the ideas that the Alter Rebbe develops in his Tanya, in the book that he authored. One of the ideas that he develops is that every person has a godly soul. Every single Jew has a godly soul, a special soul, which is a sort of a quote unquote a piece of God, a spark of God. And all the good things that we do, all the mitzvot that we do, all the good deeds that we do are the actions that come from the godly soul. Together with that, we have the animalistic soul. And from that comes all of our quote unquote animal behaviors or physical behaviors. And mainly our negative behaviors come from that soul. So we have two souls in ourselves. And there's a constant struggle between the two souls. Which one is going to overpower the other one? Right? So, and a lot of the book is devoted to understanding the struggle and different ideas that could help someone overcome the struggle and be successful in the struggle. So in one of the chapter, in chapter 31, he develops this idea that sometimes a person, his animalistic soul could be in the full strength. I think most people, a lot of people, I speak for myself, that I can't say it's not true to say that I totally overcame and got rid of my animal soul. Like most people have this constant struggle. So a lot of times when people have this struggle between the godly soul and the animalistic soul, they become depressed, sad, that they are, in a certain sense, either failing or not accomplishing what they want. So one of the ideas that the Alter Rebbe develops is that we should focus on your godly soul, that every time you do a mitzvah, every time you do a good deed, you are connecting that soul with Hashem, you're connecting with God. And the fact that your body and your animalistic soul doesn't come with it, don't get stuck on that. And appreciate your godly soul and how much is so much more important and and so much higher, and it's so much more valuable than your animalistic soul and your body. So even if your body and animalistic soul don't go with it always, don't get pulled down by that. Don't let that pull down your spirits, because you value your godly soul, which connects to God every time you do a mitzvah, every time you pray, and every time you do a good deed. So that's like the context that he's coming from. So he says, someone who has this view, in other words, he appreciates and values his godly soul over his physical body, over his physical needs and his animalistic soul. So such a person, or with such a view, it is possible, and he even says it's easy, it's attainable to love someone else just like yourself, no matter who it might be. That's the statement he says. We're going to go back to our source sheet. Share. Oh, here it is. Number 3. So let's see. A direct, easy route to fulfilling the mitzvah of loving another Jew as yourself. And he says, and this love will be towards every Jew, great and small. So usually, if a regular love that's based on a certain value I see in someone else, there will most definitely be differences between different people. Because based on the values, based on the characteristics and what I see in that person. So someone who's greater, or someone that I value what they have and what they stand for, I would probably be quicker to love, or I would be quicker to love than someone that I don't value what they stand for. I don't like the way they act, or their personality, whatever it might be. So to say this statement, to love every single person from great to small, like we spoke a number of times already, that is something that's extremely hard to relate to think that's possible. And here he's saying, I have the medicine, I have the prescription, an easy way to love every single Jew from great to small. So let's take a look and see what is his method. He says like this. You see, starting from the second paragraph in number 3, since you despise the body self, like we spoke earlier, that a person has to value his soul, his godly soul, over his animalistic soul, obviously that will not be the critical factor in your relationship with another Jew. Typically, relationships are built things that I see in the person. In other words, body, physical things, physical qualities, smart, nice, his personality. But if I look deeper, if I look above the surface, if my view on everything not just my view on everything is a deeper view, a view. Let's look at the core of everything. So then the critical factor of how I view other people won't be the external aspects of what that person has. I'll look deeper. I'll look at his soul, at his godly soul that every single Jew possesses. And now the godly souls, like he continues, let's see what he continues. So once a person doesn't look at the external, he's looking deeper. What's in this person? What is this person? What is this person really? So he has a godly soul. That leaves only your soul and spirit. And when we're looking at, and when we want to measure souls, that's obviously something that we can't measure. And who can know how great and how high is the soul and spirit of another Jew in their root and their source in the living God? So that's the first idea that he says. His first idea is, one of the main ideas of Chassidus is to look deeper. Let's look beyond the surface. So just like I look beyond the surface when it comes to understanding Torah, I look for the mystical concepts, the deeper concepts of the Torah, not just the simple and face value explanation. So when it comes to other people, let's also look beyond the surface. When it comes to other people, let's also, the critical factor in our relationship should not be the external, should not be the external qualities or personality that person has. Let's look at the soul that every single Jew has. And if we look at, and if we value, and if we look at the soul, if we're valuing the soul, if we're measuring a person based on his soul, that's something that can't be measured. And it's something that can't be measured in his external personality, something that can't be measured in his external qualities. It's something that is much deeper than that. And it's almost something that who can measure? Like he has this question. Who knows how great it is? That's his first step in really appreciating someone else. Let's look at his neshama. Let's look at his soul, which every Jew possesses. And he goes a step further. Not only we should look at the soul, and every Jew and every soul who knows the value of the soul, and therefore I love him because of his soul, because of the deeper quality, the godly soul that he possesses, which is something that can't be measured, with regular, a measuring stick. He goes a drop further. He says, especially when you consider that we all have one Father, meaning our Father in heaven. That is why all Jews are called brothers, because they literally are brothers at the root of their souls in God's oneness. There's only their body selves that differentiates them. This, that we are different, that there are separate people, that is a external, that's only the external factor. The main idea here is that we all have a godly soul, and that godly soul in the root is one, because just like God is one, the souls that come from him are also one in essence. And then different sparks of that essence gives life and comes into different people. So obviously each person has their own godly soul. But if we're looking at the root of the souls, then we're all rooted in one place. So if we're all rooted in one place, then we obviously appreciating someone else's soul and loving someone else because of his godly soul is not loving someone else, is in a certain sense really just loving yourself, meaning loving your own root. Now, obviously, this is not a simple idea. This is a very, very deep concept. And it's a concept that even to understand it takes time, and to appreciate it, we have to appreciate this idea. And we have to get used to looking beyond the surface. And when you view someone else, you have to view them from their internal godly soul perspective, which Yes, it's not a simple matter, but once you have that view, or once you have that idea, that is something, that is a way to work and to try to actually get to fulfill this commandment in a very literal way. Now let's just continue what the next paragraph, what the Alter Rebbe writes. And he says, it turns out that those who make their body self their principal concern and provide the soul only a background role can never experience true love and brotherhood. The beginning of this has to be that, and whatever love they experience would be conditional. The beginning has to be is, how do I live my life? My life has to be that my primary focus and my main and what I value most is my soul, is the spiritual aspects of my life. Now, like we start off, that doesn't mean I don't have an animal soul. That doesn't mean I don't have mine animalistic desires. However, that's not the main me. That's not the main part of me that I value. And therefore, but what I value is my godly soul. I want to see the depth of everything and not the external factors. So then, the way I view other people, I'll also look beyond the surface. I'll also look at their soul. And when I'm looking at their soul, so then I could have a real love, no matter who they are, because every single Jew has this godly soul, first of all. And second of all, the love would be, in a certain way, is a self-love, because the love to someone else is because we are all one. And we're all brothers we're all called brothers and siblings in a certain sense. Now, so according to this approach, the primary focus of the Torah, by saying you should love your fellow as yourself, is saying that you should try to train yourself to think this way. In other words, yes, an emotion is not something that you command about, get this emotion or else. But what you could be commanded, let's try to change our view. Let's try to think about, let's try to view our godly soul as the main point, as the main part of our life. Let's try to view other people's souls as the main part of them. And through that, through looking beyond the surface, we could reach a true love between each other. Now, obviously, as we said before, this is a very challenging idea to really master. But the way to start it is first to think about it, to appreciate it. And then there's a famous line that is attributed to the Chinuch, the famous author. He authored a book. The Chinuch is a book that compiles all of the mitzvot of the Torah. He says, he goes through every mitzvah and says the main, it's a book on every single parsha. He goes through the mitzvahs, the commandments in that parsha, in that Torah portion, and he says the main details, the main ideas of the mitzvah, and he also gives a reason for every mitzvah. Also gives a reason for it. So, and so for a lot of mitzvahs, he says a general idea, which in Hebrew it means acher ha'pu'ul. The Hebrew phrase is acher ha'pu'ulot nimshachot halavavot, which means after actions, our heart is drawn. If someone acts a certain way, then eventually we could start feeling that way. Eventually, we could change our view, we could change our feeling, we could change the way things that even if we could never, you ask me today, could you do this? Could you feel this way? I'll say it's impossible. I'm so far from such a feeling, from that nature. That's just not me. But sometimes when you act a certain way, the external action changes the inner self, and could help us develop that emotion. So in a certain sense, this is actually the connection between all the different approaches. Then on the one hand, we could begin with, like the first approach, how to act to other people the way we want people to act towards us. But that not only being, but instead of it staying by a dry action, that could also change our perspectives to other people, that we should really love other people, meaning we should really appreciate other people, not because of their external personalities, but much deeper than that, because of their depth, because of the godly soul that we all possess. So that's the third approach, which this approach is actually, on the one hand, taking the verse very literal, and the other hand, also giving us a path how we could appreciate and understand that we're all one family, we're all brothers, and therefore, since we have that common denominator that we're sharing, we could really appreciate someone else the way we appreciate ourselves. Any questions?
Yes, Rabbi.
Yeah.
It's Moshe. There's a philosopher by the name of Immanuel Kant. Are you familiar with him?
By Emmanuel?
Immanuel Kant, K-A-N-T. He's an existential philosopher.
Right.
He talks about the categorical imperative, which is very similar to this. I'll try to quote it. You're supposed to act as you would want all other people to act towards all other people. Act according to the maxim that you would wish all other rational people to follow, as if it were a universal law. Which I think, from what we're discussing, actually applies to this in some ways, because you're trying to maximize your behavior through actions that will eventually change your actions.
Right. And change the way you feel.
And change the way you feel as well.
Thank you very much for bringing that in. That was very, very nice. Any other thoughts? All right, so I guess we will wrap it up. And just to summarize, we were discussing today about the commandment, which appears in this week's Parsha, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, to love your fellow Jew as yourself. And we're obviously, this commandment right away is always a point of discussion. It's very hard to understand. How can you love someone else as yourself? And we offer three approaches to this commandment. Number one being that it's mainly action, the way we should treat other people. The second way being that this is a general rule, and we have to, the second being that this is a general rule, but the main thing that we're obligated to and we're held accountable for is the particulars that we find across the Torah. And the third approach being that maybe there's a certain way to view other people and a certain way to view ourselves. That based on that way, that viewpoint, we're able to appreciate other people, everyone equally. And that viewpoint is to understand and to appreciate the godly soul that is beyond the surface in every single Jew. And through that, and also in us, and through that, we could appreciate everyone the same. All right, thank you very much. And it was a pleasure this week's class.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Rabbi.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Rabbi. Bye. all.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
And have a good afternoon.
Good night.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.